this is just the beginning.
Welcome to our virtual event on immigration policy. I'm Russell Contreras, coming at you from Rio Rancho, New Mexico. And thank you to Bank of America for making events like this possible. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, Axios.com. Join the conversation on Twitter at Axios and use the hashtag AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, we will discuss the complexities on the US-Mexico border, unaccompanied minor migrant children, and migrant workers in the US economy. Our first guest is the representative of Texas's 20th Congressional District, US Representative Joaquin Castro. Congressman Castro, welcome to Axios. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good to be with you, Russ.
To start off, before we get started on current immigration policy, walk us through the region of the Rio Grande Valley and Eagle Pass and Del Rio. What are some things that the general public misconstrues and gets wrong about the border, which is just south of your district?
Well, a lot of things. I think there are a lot of misperceptions about the border. First, I mean, those communities, you talk about Eagle Pass and Del Rio, are very tight-knit communities, very humble, hardworking people, families, many that have lived there for generations, but also families where you have people that go back and forth between the US and Mexico to visit other family members that live on the other side of the border. And they've also been painted with this very ugly brush of being violent, very violent areas, you know, and I think Americans get the impression that they're perpetual danger zones. And if you visit these places, you realize that they're all-American towns, you know, with families that are trying to do their best to give their kids a better chance in life than they had. And so it's very much a thriving area. The Rio Grande Valley is the same way. You know, my wife, Ana, grew up right on the Texas-Mexico border in a small town called Alton, Texas. Much of her family still lives in Reynosa, Mexico, on the other side of the border. These were also places that for years in Texas that were starved of what I call the infrastructure of opportunity. So opportunity for jobs in higher education, in healthcare. And so it's just now that you see a lot of that infrastructure of opportunity being built out in the Rio Grande Valley and in places like Eagle Pass and Del Rio.
There have been a number of congressional delegations that have made trips to the border. Some critics will say these are props, whether they're either on the Democratic side or the Republican side. Do those visits, when they go down to places like McAllen or El Paso, Texas, shed light, or do they reinforce stereotypes about what's going on?
I mean, I think that in the past and even now, I think they have the potential to do either one. Some of the visits can be helpful. Some of them can be damaging. I think that they have affirmed that our system for how we handle asylum seekers, for example, is broken. Our immigration system is broken. And the Biden administration, because they care about the health and the safety of the people who are seeking asylum in the United States, and also because they're trying to repair a system that in many ways was further broken by Donald Trump, I think they have a real opportunity to reimagine how we treat people who come to the United States seeking asylum. And I also think they have a responsibility to do that, because when Americans see all those photos and videos of young children even sleeping in what look like aluminum blankets, and many of them in these cramped, unsanitary cells at the border processing centers, those things are basically jail cells. And that's been true regardless of who the president is. But what you see is when you get a flood of people that come at once, then the situation gets very dire. So I believe that ultimately the Biden administration can be part of changing fundamentally what we do with people when they present for asylum and what their first stop is. Their first stop should no longer be in those very cramped, unsanitary, jail-like CBP processing centers.
We were down at the border last week. A colleague of mine in El Paso. And activists there expressed concern about Title 42. This is, of course, the policy where we expel some migrants to places like Juarez. What are your concerns about Title 42, and is it something we should consider abolishing?
Yeah, my concern is that we need to be able to properly allow people as soon as possible to petition for asylum. And under Title 42, under public health, folks are being summarily expelled. In other words, they're not being given any consideration or due process with respect to their asylum petition, except for unaccompanied minors and a limited number of families. And so we shouldn't be here a year from now discussing Title 42. The Biden administration needs to be able to build up the capacity to handle the flow of asylum seekers, move them to their family and relative sponsors quickly, and also do away with Title 42. In other words, not invoke Title 42 and give these people their day in court to be considered for asylum.
Now, years ago, when I was an undergrad at the University of Houston, I went to an event where your mother was there, and she reminded us college students to know your history and know the complexities of things happening today that happened yesterday. Why do some of the rhetoric that you hear from some of our elected officials about this being an invasion and possibly attacking the English language, some trigger words for Mexican Americans when they look at their own history? Why does that trigger when we're talking about Central Americans? Is there a connection there?
Well, look, I mean, there's a permanent class of politicians in this country, and who will use the fact that there are brown-skinned people presenting themselves at the border seeking asylum, or brown-skinned immigrants, as a way to scare Americans and convince Americans that there's a lot of brown people coming to harm you, coming to hurt you. That's been going on for a long time. And if it wasn't before, it was brown-skinned immigrants. It was even the Irish, and at one point way back, it was the Germans. So there's a history in our country, an ugly history, of people using groups of people to scare others for political gain. We saw it in California in the 1990s. We saw it in Arizona, around 2010, 2009, and we've seen it in Texas for many years. But you're right. The other thing, Russ, is that oftentimes the different Latino groups, it's not just Mexicans. You have Central Americans, Cubans, Dominicans, right? Not to say that all those folks are necessarily presenting themselves at the U.S.-Mexico border, but my point is that for some politicians, all Latinos get combined into quote-unquote Mexicans. Everybody's just a Mexican, right? And so there's this lack of understanding and lack of nuance that reduces everybody to a single identity without any real attempt at understanding who these folks are.
Your brother, when he ran for president, stressed that there was a need for a Central American Marshall Plan. And now we're starting to see your colleague, Veronica Escobar in El Paso, call for something similar. When we look at the systemic problems and the challenges of Central America, we know that Biden does have some money for Central America, but is this a long-term investment that we should look towards Central America to develop some Marshall Plan to rebuild the nation from its infrastructure and government to fighting violence? Is that something that we should be considering?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's got to be one of the fundamental pieces of how the Biden administration addresses the issue of migration from Central America. Without it, I feel like we're doomed to repeat the same cycles over and over. And I don't believe that the overwhelming majority of people who migrate from the Northern Triangle countries to the United States actually want to leave their home countries. If they felt safe and protected, secure, if they felt that they had opportunity to rise above the abject poverty and the violence of drug gangs, I think most of those people would end up staying. So then the question for the United States becomes, what kind of investments can we help make in Central America that will provide more economic prosperity, that will provide more stability and help the rule of law in those nations and root out corruption as well? And so, yeah, that's got to be part of the foundation of what we do. and there are not only current conditions, but also historical things that have helped destabilize the region of Central America, including over the years, significant U.S. intervention in the politics of Latin America that were not helpful at all.
Congressman, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And next, we have a View from the Top segment with my colleague, Axios Vice President of Growth, Mia Vallo.
Thank you, Russ. I'm Mia Vallo from Axios, and I'd like to introduce Carla Molina, Head of U.S. Local Media Relations for Bank of America. Welcome, Carla.
Thanks, Mia. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks for being with us. Last month, Bank of America announced an extension to its 4-year, $1 billion commitment to advance racial equity and economic opportunity in the U.S. Tell us about the commitment and what the bank is trying to achieve.
Sure, thanks. So I'm going to take us a step back further. And last summer, Bank of America announced a 4-year $1 billion commitment really to advance racial equality and create economic opportunity for all communities. As we saw with the onset of the coronavirus, we know that communities of color, and in particular our Latino communities and Black communities, were disproportionately impacted. So Bank of America took immediate action and announced this commitment. The commitment is really focused on 4 key pillars. Those are health. So of course, again, we saw those disproportionate impacts. And so we wanted to make sure that we were addressing some of the most immediate needs, such as food insecurity, providing PPE for those communities that were most in need. The second pillar is focused on entrepreneurship and small business, and so providing that vital support so small business owners can keep the lights on of their businesses. For many of those watching Axios Latino, we know that entrepreneurship runs deep in the Hispanic community. My husband is an entrepreneur, and so we wanted to provide access to capital and support, such as providing access to Paycheck Protection Program loans to help struggling Hispanic business owners make it through. And, we have strong relationships with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And so we know that's what we were hearing. So very important for us to address that need. The third pillar of the commitment is really focused on affordable housing and making sure that people have a roof over their heads. So whether that is working to provide affordable housing units and or as we know, for the Latino community, homeownership and attaining that dream of homeownership is very important. We all think about legacy and the legacy that we're trying to leave behind for future generations, and the dream of homeownership is that first step. So the bank is actually has a community homeownership commitment, and just recently that went from a $5 billion to a $15 billion commitment, where we're providing assistance to help those who are looking to buy a home overcome some of the biggest barriers to homeownership, such as saving enough for a down payment. So we're providing grants and other forms of assistance. And then finally, the fourth pillar of the commitment is really focused on jobs and education. So unfortunately, we know that Latino students tend to have higher dropout rates. And so it was really important for us to work with Hispanic serving institutions, community colleges, historically Black colleges and universities, and local employers, so that we're providing the necessary jobs training and skill development so that students of color can see not only the fact that they will have jobs coming out of college, encouraging them to stay in, but also that they have long-term career paths so that they can, drive progress for themselves, for their families, and for their communities overall. So that's really the commitment in a nutshell. Most recently, we did announce that it is now a 5-year, $1.25 billion commitment. So we're very excited about that. We'll continue to work on this. And it's important to note that this commitment is really grounded in a long history that Bank of America has in serving and representing the diverse communities where we live and work. So this isn't new work for us, but given everything that we saw, it was just important for us to really double down our efforts, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Thanks so much for sharing those pillars with us and also the increased commitment by Bank of America. And how has the program had an impact on Hispanic Latino communities so far?
Well, so far we have been able to make a pretty significant impact, but of course there's much work that needs to be done. So I mentioned in the areas of health, we stepped up and worked in local communities in Los Angeles, for example, to provide free coronavirus testing at a time when we knew it was critical, and continue to work. When the flu season came around, we partnered with CVS to provide free flu vaccines to our Hispanic community. So in the area of health, again, we focus on food insecurity, the very basic needs to make sure that people can take care of themselves. But in addition to that, again, we, for small business owners, we also know that on top of having to struggle to keep the lights on, they had to, endure additional costs. So we were there to provide PPE. We provided 25 million facial coverings over the past year to communities. And that not only that, but provided hand sanitizer, gloves. So we're really making an impact from that perspective, and providing access to capital, like I said, whether it was through PPP loans or through support of our community partners like minority depository institutions that we've invested in, or community development financial institutions that are providing loans to small businesses so that they can make it through.
Great. Can you also tell us what are some of the other ways Bank of America is helping Hispanic Latino clients?
Sure. So whether it's helping individuals even have the basic financial education they need, we have our free online education platform, Better Money Habits, that's available in Spanish, Mejores Hábitos Financieros, or serving our business clients. We have in all of our top Latino markets, we have Hispanic Latino business councils that are really there to create long-term relationships with our clients. We know that's really important to our Latino clients, especially that's how we win their hearts. And they're all working together as one team to make sure that we're helping them with all of their needs. So as I said, if it's the basic financial education, or whether they're there to growing their businesses, or they're needing investing advice, we're there to support all of their needs. And of course, we offer so many of our services in language, whatever is most relevant and whatever is going to help them most. We're there for them when they need us.
These are all great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you again, Carla, for joining us today.
Thanks, Mia.
Now back to my colleague, Russ Contreras.
Our final guest is the president of the LIBRE Initiative, Daniel Garza, joining from McAllen, Texas. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Hermano, of course, it's a pleasure.
Before we get into the current situation about on the border and immigration policy, talk to a little bit about the creation of the LIBRE Initiative and the Koch's network interest in immigration. They, of course, take a libertarian view about immigration. Why is this a more nuanced approach, and what are its goals?
Well, we want to help to remove barriers to what's keeping people from generating wealth for themselves and wealth for others, to be productive in society. And one of those, of course, is our immigration policy that has hindered really productivity in America. We need to have, of course, security at the border, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have a flow of immigrants that, of course, are meeting market demand, that are meeting family needs. and are making our society better. I mean, throughout the arc of history, America has been strengthened because of immigrants that have come to America, and we need to honor that legacy. So at the LIBRE Initiative, we advance really the principles that allow for a free society to the Latino community and remove barriers keeping people from the marketplace.
Currently, right now, there are various immigration proposals, but we've seen these for years, starting with President Bush, going to President Obama, and then President Trump. What's at stake here if we do not adopt some sort of comprehensive immigration reform in 2021?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, we continue to hinder productivity and allowing people to thrive. At the same time, I think it's really important to make sure that our economy is humming at a pace where most Americans can benefit, right, and have unlimited opportunities. And we know that immigrants have come to America to help in that productivity. In the low-skills sector, like agriculture, restaurants, tarring hot roofs, dairy cows, cattle. Well, at the same time, they also help us to complement and showcase the talents in the specialized, high skills sector, where there's digital, STEM field, and all these other areas. And so when our immigration system is broken, especially when our narratives and the signals that we are sending is causing surges at the border, it overtaxes our systems, and our system gets overwhelmed, and our personnel are unable to handle it in a way that is efficient. So what we need is to address the problem head on, find out what are the causal factors, and address those issues, but in a way that is bipartisan, in a way where we are working together towards consensus to allow, I think, all Americans to thrive and again, honor our immigration legacy.
Now, the LIBRE Initiative, you guys have hosted bipartisan forums, bringing Democrats and Republicans together to talk about policy. It's not as sexy because you guys aren't yelling at each other and there aren't any cameras there. You guys are looking into and how you make the sausage, so to speak. Why is that important for the adoption of any immigration policy, that it remains a bipartisan initiative and it's not one party overwhelming the other?
Well, because Russell, one party doesn't get to define what immigration reform is. They both have to come together and reach a consensus. And America is made stronger when voices in both sides can come together and strike a balance between security and entry, the flows of immigrants to America. And that requires consensus. Look, Latinos have been burned in the past, and we're getting to a point where we're very cynical about empty promises that are being made by either side. Democrats will tell you, if you vote for me, I'll get you immigration reform. But we've learned what they haven't told us is if you vote for them, they'll get us immigration reform as long as they get everything they want and the other side gets nothing. Well, that equation doesn't work. And of course, Republicans, tend to emphasize their immigration policy more on security. Well, we're not going to enforce our way out of this situation because we know that smugglers and traffickers are very crafty, and they'll find ways around the security systems, and the cost to enter illegally spikes up as well. And so it's going to take a balance of both security and how we handle entry into America and providing legal channels for people to come and be productive and contribute to America.
If you listen to the immigration debate, and we're talking about the 11 million or so folks here that were without papers, who are undocumented, you tend to get this picture that either they're raging Marxists or they're going to be strong Democrats in the future. What don't we know about this 11 million, these 11 million people, and what kind of things can we say that's shaping their politics? What can you tell us that we don't know about this population?
Well, the Latinos are like all other Americans. They have a diversity of priorities when it comes to public policy. And a lot of Latinos, we learned from the 2020 elections, are looking past party to make sure that elected officials are actually prioritizing their own priorities when it comes to representing them in the halls of Congress. And so for Latinos, we have always known that the economy, jobs, opportunity, access to the marketplace has always been a priority. Healthcare, Latina women care, of course, that we have safety nets for those who are not getting adequate quality healthcare. But they also want to know that you're going to preserve an employee-based insurance system that takes care of their own families too. There's a balance that we can strike between government and the private sector. And when it comes to equality education, I don't think there is anything more we can do to assure success for our children than them achieving a quality education. And school choice is a big deal for Latinos, and it's widely embraced. And so when I mentioned the 2020 elections, we saw across the board massive shift in the political preferences of Latinos when it came to going into the voting booth. And that comes from Latinos who have sophisticated in our electoral process to the point where they are looking at candidates and they are saying, I'm going to reject bad policies and those who are advancing bad policies that are not pro-growth, that are not empowering me to choose the education of my children. And I'm going to reward and respond to those candidates who are advancing good policy, that are for energy production, for constitutionalist judges and will honor our Constitution, who are going to lessen the tax burden, lessen the regulatory burden. All these issues Latinos care about. And so what you saw, again, from coast to coast, was Latinos responding to those dynamics in our electoral system, like all other Americans.
Now, you live in McAllen, Texas. It's a place of paradox where it's got a booming economy, a lot of manufacturing and trade with Mexico and Latin America. At the same time, it's one of the poorest areas in the country. Yet this is an area that has lived like this for decades. What is your reaction when you have political leaders from both parties come to McAllen and use it as a backdrop for current immigration debates, whether they want more enforcement or they want change in refugee policies? Does it anger you? What is your response?
Frankly, Russ, bienvenidos. Let's have that conversation. We welcome dialogue with our elected officials. I just met with, I had the opportunity and the privilege of sitting down with 18 of our US senators who came down to the border. And we talked about, the importance of balancing, a policy that is going to address security. Of course, that's very important part of the equation. But also, what are we going to do to accommodate for future flows of immigrants, coming to America that we need to meet market demand and to make sure, that we honor our legacy in a way that is dignifying to the immigrants. And we talked about how we need to increase facilities, capabilities that can adjudicate cases, for asylum or for refugee status. People need to know right away where they stand and give them certainty and clarity on these kind of issues. And we need more personnel to make that happen. And at the same time, also talk about how we need to reach consensus on an immigration reform bill. We want to have those conversations. So, welcome to the Rio Grande Valley. We will accept you with open arms if you want to have productive conversation. But if you're coming to just strike a political point, and create division, partisan division, we're not going to welcome that, and we're not going to participate in that. We want folks that are going to, who want to make America better, who want to improve our policies, and make reforms that are going to be productive, that are going to allow people to thrive, all people in America.
Daniel, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Russ. Thank you.
And thank you, Bank of America, for making this event possible. Why it matters? Why do we care about immigration policy? Well, for decades, we've been talking about immigration reform ever since Ronald Reagan left office after his 1986 amnesty program. Immigration has come up in public policy and discussions from George Bush all the way to President Donald Trump and today with President Biden. Immigration policy defines not only our labor market, but where we are as a culture in this country. On one side, folks will talk about, quote, invasion or the changing of our demographic makeup. On the other side, you have a discussion about what should we do with this policy? Is this a humane way to look at our immigration policy? And is this a humane way to look at us as our souls of this country? Right now, the discussion about immigration, from dreamers down to what do we do with the 11 million or so undocumented people, will continue to permeate our debate. And yet both sides tend to believe that if nothing gets done, this will be red meat for elections. Right now, Axios will be looking at this issue. We just came back from the border, and we will go again in the future. And we will bring you the smartest news to make you smarter faster. Thank you for joining us. For more information, sign up for Axios Latino, visit Axios/newsletters, or go to our Axios app. Again, thank you for joining us.